I'm going to ask you this question. At what point do you decide what the question is? When to answer that question? Well, I tell you what, you ask the question, you answer that question as soon as possible.
Welcome to the Social Mojo Podcast, the place where entrepreneurs and creatives come to discover the secrets behind building a powerful, engaging brand without spending a fortune. Let's meet the host, Mr. Anthony Porter, your guide on this journey to harness the power of organic social media. In each episode, we dive deep into the strategies that work, sharing insights, actionable tips, and success stories from experts and trailblazers who've done it all. From planning your content with precision, growing your audience authentically, to monetizing your passion effectively, we've got you covered. So, whether you're just starting out or looking to elevate your social media game, stay tuned. Because here, at the Social Mojo Podcast, we're all about making your brand unforgettable, organically.
It's day 6, y'all. It's day 6. Day 6 of the 12 days of podcasting, impactful growth, monetization podcast series. I'm your host, Anthony Porter. And of course, the podcast itself is about attracting, growing. It's day 6, y'all. It's day 6 of the Social Mojo Podcast, 12 days of podcasting impactful series. I'm your host, Mr. Anthony Porter. And we are here to help entrepreneurs start a podcast to grow their business with the use of podcasting by attracting, converting, and delivering a system, a podcast that is so impactful, you cannot afford not to listen to it. So without no further ado, let's jump into day 6. So we have discussed in the previous portion of the podcast ladder, we've talked about the formatting. We've talked about the ideal customer. We've talked about how a podcast itself is structured. There are levels to this. We talked about Cat 1, the premise of Category 1. And if you're reaching Category 1, then you have basically mastered podcasting. But it doesn't just stop there. You have to be able to not only grow your show, reel in the listeners, but retain those listeners. So we are going into the second half of this Impactful. And if you look at any of the information, I deliberately spelled impactful wrong because we're running in a pack, not pack full, but we're running in a pack. Remember, like the Wolf Pack, WCW days, we're running in a pack. So today we are going to talk about how podcast episodes that keep listeners engaged and wanting more. See, we talked about retaining them in the beginning, right? So now we need to talk about how we get these episodes to keep them engaged, keep them wanting to come back, keep them wanting to be a part and feel like they're a part of your community. Because that's what this is about. This is about your community. This has nothing to do with how great of a podcast thumbnail you got or how great of a show notes you have. This is about the value within inside your content that will have them coming back. This is about hook, story, and possibly the offer towards the end. So our goal is to achieve an episode completion rate of 70% or more. See, in the last episode, we talked about understanding the metrics when you're retaining. And a lot of people look at downloads, and downloads is exactly not where it's at all the time. See, people look at the downloads and then they get discouraged because they're like, oh man, the downloads they're not doing what I thought they would do. You're looking at it wrong. What you need to look at is how many people are finishing your podcast. And when you look to see how many people are finishing your podcast, then guess what? You look at that and you figure out if nobody's sticking around, then I need to figure out what it is I need to do in order to keep these listeners engaged. So it starts out with the hook. You got 3 to 5 seconds to reel somebody in. 3 to 5. And once you reel them in, you got to learn how to keep them. So on average, listeners stay tuned to more than 70% of the episode. That's what the rates mean. That's what the episode completion rates of over 70%. That's where it comes from. You want your listeners to listen in. You want your listeners to stay tuned. You want your listeners to complete your podcast. And once they complete your podcast, then you want them to, hey, be your brand advocate. See, it's like playing sports. It's like when the coach draws up the perfect play. It takes everybody in that huddle to be cooked in or dialed in like a pot of gumbo. Gumbo. I say gumbo. Gumbo. So with them being dialed in or you're being dialed in, it helps you out a lot more because guess what? Now you have developed a formula, a strategy that can basically transform your business because listen, podcasts are evergreen. Podcasts are out there, and if you make it video or you're making audio, these are on the cloud somewhere, whether it be on the audio cloud, whether it be on the video cloud, or whether it's on YouTube. For both, these pieces of content are there for the taking. It's just a matter of allowing somebody to fit in and get a portion of what's going on. So to do everything that we're discussing, to basically cover every aspect, I'm going to share with you a rule of thumb that will always help you achieve your goal, no matter what the circumstances in, I mean, you have to realize that no matter what your audience, your mission, or your format. See, we talked about that. So we talked about your audience. That's your ideal customer. We talked about your your listeners' mission. What is it that you want to get them to understand or get them to do? And then we talked about the format. So no matter what that is, there's only one question that matters. It's only one. Only one. And a lot of people don't get it. So like I had interviewed a friend of mine a while ago. And we were sitting there chopping it up, and we got to talking about some of the best podcasters in the world. Tim Ferriss comes up. Now, I've listened to Tim Ferriss, and Tim Ferriss has given me a lot of insight. And if you don't know who Tim Ferriss is, he has a podcast called Smart Money Tactics Podcast, or Smart Money Podcast. And I asked my buddy, Chris, I said, hey, have you ever wanted to know how the heck they managed to get listeners to pay attention to a podcast about the economy, about side hustles, about smart money tactics and passive income? Have you ever wondered, like, if you could ask Tim Ferriss that question, would you ask him that question? And he said to me, it was funny because he's funny as all outdoors. He says that probably has been raised so in someone's mind, sometimes it'll settle in and sometimes it'll make them sit back and think. But most of the time, it's not suitable at all. He literally says to me, says that question, like the story, makes you think. And I'm thinking, how the hell does that work? And he's like, listen, it's the principle. People are involved with the shiny object syndrome, the imposter syndrome. So you have to think that people will sit back. They want to know how they can walk away from their 9 to 5, how they can start a successful side hustle business. And he's giving them the tools. He's giving them the lecture. He's giving them the resources on how they can start that. And I thought about that again, and I was like, you're right. Because somebody gave me the tools to want to start a podcast. And at the end, we both looked at each other and said, yeah, I love to ask that because that's a damn good question. And it is. So when we make a promise to reel people in and get them to lock in on some of our shows, and, I have my personal, Social Mojo podcast, and he has his, we are at least implied that we have the answer, which we do. Because if we don't have it, we'll find somebody that does have it. And that's why we always say, if you have any questions, feel free to email us. You can always email us at the Social Mojo Podcast and ask your question. I'll be more than happy to answer that. And so with me, it's, hey, hello, and welcome to the Social Mojo Podcast. I am Anthony Porter. Today's show, we are going to talk about, and that's how he got them in. See, remember I told you in the last episode that what they do is when they change the intro, you basically telling them what the show's about. And once you let them know what the show's about, that gives them the choice of whether they want to stay or whether they want to go. So by giving them that choice, there's a whole lot that nobody's talking about. We let you know what the show's about. We ask the question, and throughout the entire show, we'll give you the answer. And then we'll throw an ad in there somewhere. We'll selfishly promote, because nobody has reached out just yet. We're still building traction. I'm still loving the so-called, I need you to subscribe downloaders that we have. And ever since we shared or we paid attention to Tim first, the concept of, the podcasters, it works. It truly works. You have to really sit back and you have to think that it truly does work its own miracle. So I've been pleasantly surprised at how this trick has improved podcasters of all types: entertainment shows, true crime, interviews, how-tos, you name it, it's improved it. Once you introduce yourself in the beginning, because if you pay attention to the Social Mojo podcast, we give you a snippet in the beginning. But then we also hit you with who we are. And when I come on, I reintroduce myself. We talk about what the show's about. All right. So I know you want to ask, why is this one particular trick so powerful? It helps you focus on the content by picking one question that serves as the overall mission of the episode. Please believe me when I tell you, if it serves as the overall mission of the episode, you are ensured that your content is sharp and relevant. So basically, you are putting it all on the line. It's like Game 7. Who you want with the ball? You want Steve Kerr or you want Mike? You got to be the Michael Jordan of podcast. If that's my era, you got to be the LeBron James or the Kobe Bryant or Mr. Fundamental Tim Duncan. You have to be those particular individuals who want that stress, who want that on their shoulders. You have to be that person. You cannot be a passive person in business, because people will walk all over you. So you have to make sure that your content is sharp. You have to make sure that your content is relevant. You want it to hold your listeners' attention. You want people to stay. You want them tuned in because they are eager to find out the answer to the burning question. And if you do it right, and in your niche, you pick the right question at the right time, boy, Lord Jesus, you're going to take off. So listen, but I will say this. If your episode veers into something that they're not interested in, they out of here. Boy, be gone quicker than a $2 bill. So you want to engage them, but you want to make sure your format, you stay on track. You have to. You have to want to stay on track. So when you are dealing with your production, you definitely have to know that, hey, your episode central question that makes the planning, recording, editing more efficient. So like I use this thing called Podcast You. It helps me lay out my podcast. It helps me with my workflow. I never considered anything like that until I used it. Once I used it, it was remarkable. As a podcaster, you're thinking, man, I'm gonna put these episodes together. We're gonna get this money. No, it's not that simple. Starting a podcast may sound easy. You get a computer, a microphone, a camera, your phone, whatever, and you're a podcaster. But you got to have the content. You got to have the video. You got to have the audio that sounds good, the video that looks good. You got to have all of that. And really, when it comes to interviewing, this structure makes interviews easier because you got to come up with the questions. Now, there's a segment that I will be doing later on down the line about how to question an interviewer to keep your listeners engaged. There's a trick behind that. Trust me. Again, studying Tim first, studying David Sands. I never realized that. But once I did, it was a game changer. A serious game changer. Now, you want to keep them on the guardrails. You want to keep them built into the conversation. You want to keep everybody engaged. And I know you're like, oh, it sounds all good. It does sound good. But you got to make sure every episode poses a single question. And at what point? So at what point? I'm going to ask you this question. At what point do you decide what the question is? When to answer that question? Well, I tell you what, you ask the question, you answer that question as soon as possible. And then so listen, you hook them in, give them a piece of it's like going to Sunday dinner with Big Mama. Big Mama been in the kitchen slaving all day. Now, if you're from the South, you'll understand what I'm saying. Southern cooking is lovely. They cook breakfast and dinner all in the same time. But what they do is they give it to you like, okay, so breakfast, you get a little grits. And I ain't gonna get it. I don't eat grits, but I ain't gonna get into the question of which is better. Now I don't do all of that because I don't eat grits, so I have no dog in that fight. But what happens is they give you that. They give you the start out, the appetizer and breakfast, and then here comes the main course, and then they finish it off with a slice of Grandmama's breakfast cobbler. You full, right? Well, 3-4 hours later, it's dinner time. And them Southern folk, they cook. Hey, boy, it'd be the best fried chicken you done had. But it's hook. You hook them in. You give them the story after they hooked in. Listen, you ask the question, you answer the question. You tell them exactly what it is. That's your hook. You give them the story. That's your episode. Your offer is at the end. So when you start looking at listen, here's how you do this. To be the best at what you want to do, you have to go back and you have to look at all the episodes you've done and see, did you do this? Because see, sometimes the earliest episode productions is not as good as the ones that you start doing something. And here's another thing. If you're working on a podcast, you have to be able to work on your episodes every day. You have to come up with content every day. You have to be looking at something. Anything on TV can trigger an episode. See, for me as a solopreneur, you want to be able to have episodes that focuses on solo entrepreneurship, content marketing, digital marketing. See, content marketing is the content that you create. Digital marketing are the tools that you use to market with, the platforms that you use. So you want to be able to have all of that at the same time, right? So the many benefits that you get is you basically, the work will speak for itself once you start making changes. So we do a lot of reverse engineering. We like to work backwards to illustrate this point. And I give you an example. Let's assume you have an interview show, right? If you pose a question after the episode is edited and you're ready for publishing, you get to use the question to craft a great episode title. We'll talk more about that like tomorrow. But if you pose it early before you or your team edits the episode, guess what? You could go in here, get that, put it in the beginning, get your intro, lead into it, and then answer the question. It's that simple. The earlier, the better. Because you know the pieces. You sitting there, you going over the conversation, you edit it out, you taking out stuff that you don't want in there. A lot of times people have bloopers and things like that. That's some behind the scenes content that you created. Listen, one video, one podcast can generate 10 to 12 pieces of content to spread all across social media to get you out there. But it's according to how early you pose the question before you even start the interview. You ask the question, and in that interview that gets them to thinking, and then once the answer comes out, the interview goes so much smoother. It allows you to you can almost kind of go off script, because most podcasters have a scripted list of questions that they want to ask. But when they have these questions that they want to ask, that once they ask one question, and that one question can change the whole complexion of a podcast. So you just have to understand that, when you pose it and you pose it early, it can change and it can make or break you. So understand, getting to know how to get your listeners to stick around is tremendous. And that's what we talked about today. You ask the question, you answer the question, you answer it early enough, your guest will be more likely to accept your invitation because you're posing more well thought out episodes than probably earlier in your content. So yes, if you pose a question before you even pick which guest to invite, you probably will have a better chance of landing the guest, a better guest, because of your selection, because you was well prepared, because you asked the question that needed to be asked and got the answer early enough. So you did good. You'll do good. And itself will be in, service of your listener's mission. So do you see the earlier that you ask, the earlier on in your content creation, situations, videos, audio, social media posts, if you never ask the question, you start to change that and things will start to turn around for you. It all adds up in the end. Podcast episodes that are delight and your listeners will keep coming back. They loving it. All right. Now keep in mind, this is just my idea. This is my process. This is what I think. You come up with your own idea, but you can use that. But come up with your own idea on how you want to keep your listeners engaged with your podcast when you start out, or if you already have one. Oh, yeah. Well, if you want to try it, ask the question, craft your question. And you should be able to get the answers that you want. So the key is to be constantly looking out for the answer to this question. What question is this podcast episode answer for my listeners? Once you know what that is, your content will be better. Again, what question is this podcast episode answering for my listeners? Once you know what that is, everything will be smooth. And remember, you got to approach it. It's just for interview shows. You can use it for your solo discussions, all of that. You can use it anywhere. Whether you're running your solo show, like I said, or a sports talk show, or you're having a dramatic classic interview showing, framing each episode around the question will keep your audience hooked. Try it in your very next episode. I guarantee you, you will see the difference. You will definitely see the difference, man. You're going to see the difference. Not just in your not just in your completion rates, but how engaged your audience becomes. Now, that you know how to create a podcast episode that hooks and hold listeners' attention long enough, ready to move on to the next one. All right. So how to package your episode and promote that is what we're going to talk about tomorrow. When we talk about that, we're going to talk about how you get that. And if you have an audience and you want them to stick around, we're going to show you how to do that and let them get into it too. All right. That's tomorrow. That's the next day's episode. That's day 7. We here. I'm going to see y'all though. I'm going to see y'all around. It's your boy, Anthony Porter, Social Mojo Podcast. If you have any questions, email is going to be in the description below. Any one of them. YouTube, Red Circle, Spotify, Apple Music, all of them. All right. Again, man, I appreciate you stopping by today. Subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe to us on Apple Music. We're going to put the links in, all right? I'm going to holler at y'all, man. Peace.
And that wraps up another episode of the Social Mojo Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and spending your time with us today. We hope you found our conversation insightful and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe to the Social Mojo Podcast on your favorite platform, and be sure to download the episodes so you never miss out on our latest content. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us continue bringing you great discussions every week. A special thank you to our incredible executive producers, Sincere and Charlie Straughter, Leah Cash, and Theory Porter. Your vision and dedication make this podcast possible. Remember, the Social Mojo Podcast is a proud part of the Amplify Pod Academy, where we strive to amplify voices and share stories that matter. Until next time, stay connected and keep the mojo flowing. Bye.